A recent discovery about the source of Sacagawea's debilitating pain reveals a tragic truth the expedition journals almost kept secret. For generations, her image has been frozen in time, the stoic young mother pointing the way west. But behind that symbol lies a far more human story of survival, one marked by profound loneliness, silent suffering, and a resilience that literally shaped the map of America. This isn't just the tale of a guide, it's the story of a child of two worlds, navigating a brutal landscape not just of rivers and mountains, but of betrayal and impossible choices. Most of us know the textbook version, Sacagawea, the Shoshone teenager who, with her infant son strapped to her back, guided Lewis and Clark into the uncharted wilderness. She is often presented as a passive figure, a part of the scenery. But to see her that way is to miss the entire point. The full story of her life is an epic saga of survival, a narrative woven with threads of kidnapping, betrayal, and a marriage that was less a union and more a continued captivity. Her supposed partner, the fur trader Toussaint Charbonneau, wasn't just a minor character. His actions consistently endangered the mission and inflicted deep wounds on the woman who held it together. We'll trace her remarkable journey from a violent childhood abduction to her vital, yet agonizing, role on America's most famous trek. We'll explore the moments of quiet desperation recorded between the lines of the captain's journals and the physical pain she endured in silence. By the end, you'll understand why modern scholars are convinced her most intense suffering was directly caused by the man who claimed to be her husband, and how her legacy is not one of simple assistance, but of indispensable salvation for the core of discovery. Sacagawea's story begins around 1788 in the rugged, beautiful land where present-day Idaho meets Montana, among the Agaidika band of the Shoshone people. Her childhood, though short-lived, was spent in a culture deeply connected to the demanding rhythms of the Rocky Mountains. This connection to the land would later become one of her greatest strengths, but that childhood was shattered abruptly when she was about 12 years old. A war party of Hidatsa warriors descended on her camp. The attack was swift and brutal. She would have witnessed unimaginable violence, the clash of weapons, the cries of the wounded, the chaos of a community torn apart. Several of her people were killed, and she, along with other young girls, was taken captive. In a single day, she was severed from her family, her language, and her identity, forced to march hundreds of miles east to Hidatsa villages near the Missouri River in present-day North Dakota. For the next 3 years, she lived in a state of servitude. Her existence was one of hard labor and marginal status. She was a Lemhi Shoshone, living among the Hidatsa, a captive with no agency and no kin. Then, around 1804, her status changed once more, trading one form of bondage for another. She was either sold or gambled away to a much older French-Canadian fur trader named Toussaint Charbonneau, a man who had been living among the Hidatsa. Charbonneau's reputation was already vile. He was known within the rough frontier community as a man who traded in commodities, including human lives, and had a documented history of violence against women. He saw Sacagawea not as a person, but as an asset. He already had at least one other Shoshone wife, making Sacagawea part of a household dynamic she never chose. For her, this was not a marriage in any meaningful sense. It was a transfer of ownership, another layer of captivity wrapped in the guise of frontier domesticity. Her fortunes seemed to take a dramatic turn in the late autumn of 1804, when a strange group of men arrived at the Hidatsa villages. They were the core of discovery, led by Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Exhausted from their journey up the Missouri, they were preparing to winter at Fort Mandan. Their mission, commissioned by President Jefferson, was monumental: to map the new Louisiana Territory, find a practical route to the Pacific Ocean, and document everything, the flora, the fauna, and the native nations they encountered. As they planned for the next, even more dangerous leg of the journey, they faced a critical problem. They knew they would need to acquire horses from the Shoshone tribes in the Rockies to cross the mountains. To do that, they would need interpreters who could bridge the language gap. They interviewed several candidates, including Toussaint Charbonneau. The captains were distinctly unimpressed by him. Clark would later call him a man of no peculiar merit. However, they discovered that his young wife, Sacagawea, spoke Shoshone. She was the key. They hired Charbonneau on the explicit condition that Sacagawea would come along to interpret. So they hired the couple, but in truth, they only truly needed her. She was the indispensable link, while Charbonneau was largely a burdensome passenger they had to tolerate. Just months before the journey west was set to begin, Sacagawea faced another life-altering event. She gave birth to a son, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. The labor was difficult. So powerful is the aura of her resilience that a persistent legend emerged, claiming she consumed powdered rattlesnake to hasten the process. A story that, true or not, speaks to the immense fortitude people instinctively attribute to her. While most new mothers would be resting, Sacagawea was preparing to carry her newborn into one of history's great wilderness expeditions. In April of 1805, as the ice broke on the Missouri, the Corps of Discovery pushed off from Fort Mandan. Sacagawea, likely not yet 17, bundled her infant son, whom Clark would affectionately nickname Pomp or Little Pompey, and stepped into the vast unknown, not as a passenger, but as a working member of the Corps. Her value became immediately apparent and went far beyond simple translation. She was a cultural translator. Her very presence, a woman with a baby, was a universal signal of peaceful intentions to the tribes they met. A war party did not travel with a mother and child. This simple fact may have saved the expedition from hostile encounters on numerous occasions. She foraged for wild roots, berries, and plants like wild artichokes, supplementing their meager diet. She prepared meals, mended clothing, and her knowledge of herbal remedies made her the expedition's de facto medic. She remembered landmarks from her childhood migration, offering crucial geographical clues. Clark adored Little Pomp, and the child became a sort of mascot for the weary men. But the journey was relentless and brutal. They faced grueling portages, treacherous river currents, biting insects, and constant exhaustion. And soon, a single terrifying accident would lay bare the shocking incompetence of her husband and highlight her own cool-headed bravery. In May of 1805, on the upper Missouri, disaster nearly struck. Charbonneau was at the helm of one of the expedition's pirogues, a large benzoe canoe. A sudden squall whipped across the water. As the wind caught the sail, Charbonneau, in a pure panic, froze and then mishandled the tiller. The boat nearly capsized, threatening to plunge the expedition's most vital items, scientific instruments, medicine, and, most critically, the journals and maps, into the churning river. As Charbonneau wailed and pleaded to his god, Sacagawea acted. With her baby in her arms, she remained calm. As the boat was steadied, she leaned over the side, deftly retrieving the priceless floating papers and containers. She saved the intellectual core of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Lewis, in a rare moment of scathing critique, later wrote that Charbonneau was the most timid waterman in the world. But his cowardice was merely inconvenient. His next act of betrayal would be intimately destructive. Not long after this river incident, Sacagawea fell violently, mysteriously ill. For days, she was racked with pain and fever. The captain's journals note she was out of her senses and dangerously weak. Clark, who had grown genuinely fond of her, was furious and deeply worried. He penned a line that resonates with accusation. "If she dies, it will be the fault of her husband." Modern historians, examining the symptoms described, point to a likely culprit, gonorrhea, or another venereal infection, almost certainly contracted from and passed to her by Charbonneau, who was known to frequent prostitutes at the trading posts. Her immense pain, which nearly claimed her life, was not from the wilderness, but from the man she was forced to travel with. She recovered, through her own strength, and perhaps with the aid of the very herbs she gathered. But the emotional trials of the journey were just beginning. As the expedition finally pushed into the Rocky Mountains, the landscape began to stir old memories. Sacagawea recognized rock formations, river bends, and valleys. They were entering Shoshone territory, the land of her birth. One can only imagine the torrent of emotions, grief, nostalgia, hope that must have flooded her. The moment of reunion, when it came, was one of the most powerfully human episodes of the entire journey. The Corps made contact with the Shoshone band. As Sacagawea began to interpret, she suddenly realized the band's chief, Kamiawait, was her own brother. The child lost years ago in a raid was now standing before her as a leader. The stoic composure she had maintained for over 1,000 miles broke. She threw her blanket over him in a traditional sign of familial joy and wept tears of overwhelming emotion. For a brief, glorious moment, she was home. She could have stayed. The Shoshone would have welcomed her. Some accounts even suggest she was introduced to the man she had been promised to in childhood, a glimpse of the parallel life that was stolen from her. Yet, she chose to continue west with Lewis and Clark. Why? The journals don't say. Perhaps she felt a duty to see the journey through, or a bond with Clark and her son's future. Perhaps, in a cruel twist, her ties to Charbonneau and her infant son limited her options. She left her family once more, continuing the grueling march toward the Pacific. The crossing of the Bitterroot Mountains was a nightmare of starvation and cold, where the men were reduced to eating tallow candles and their own colts. Through every hardship, the captain's journals praise her fortitude, cheerfulness, and unshakable resourcefulness. Clark, in a simple, profound summation, said she inspired us. After sighting the vast Pacific Ocean and enduring a miserable rain-soaked winter at Fort Clatsop, the Corps turned back. The return trip held one last profound heartbreak for Sacagawea. Upon the expedition's conclusion, the Charbonneau family settled for a time in St. Louis at Clark's invitation. Immersed in a bustling, alien world of brick and commerce, Sacagawea faced an impossible choice. Recognizing the opportunities William Clark, now a revered figure, could provide, she and Charbonneau made the decision to leave young Jean-Baptiste, their pomp, in Clark's care for his education. It was a sacrifice of monumental proportion, a mother giving up her child to secure him a future she could not offer. She had a daughter, Lisette, soon after, but her health, perhaps broken by years of relentless hardship and disease, finally failed. Sacagawea died at Fort Manuel in 1812 from what historians believe was a putrid fever, likely typhus. She was only about 24 years old. Her legacy, however, refused to be buried. Her face adorns the US dollar coin, a symbolic but often overlooked tribute. The river where she saved. The journals bears her name, the Sacagawea River. The romanticized myth of a love affair with William Clark is just that, a myth. Their relationship was one of deep mutual respect and friendship across a vast cultural divide. She was the unwavering compass on a lost American journey, a symbol of guidance itself. We only know her through the writings of others, the journals of Lewis, Clark, and the sergeants. She left no letters, no diary. Yet her spirit shouts from their pages in every act of competence, every moment of quiet endurance. Her name, fittingly, has multiple translations, bird woman and boat launcher. Both are perfect. One suggests freedom and a broad perspective. The other denotes action, movement, and setting forth. Born in turmoil, she became the key to a continent, not by leading from the front, but by sustaining the endeavor from within. Her story is not one of celebrity, but of essential, often painful, contribution. It reminds us that history is built not just by the captains who write the journals, but by the quiet, resilient souls who make the journey possible. If this deeper story of resilience and hidden history resonated with you, if it changed your perception of this iconic figure, help us share more narratives like it. Please like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought, where we dive deep into the forgotten figures and untold stories that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments which other overlooked historical figures you'd like us to explore next.